Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about our risk indicator for Bitcoin and how we can validate it through backtesting. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So if you've been following the channel, you're quite familiar with these types of graphs. What I'm showing here is the price action of Bitcoin over time, and I've color-coded each day to the output of our risk indicator, the UDPI. So a score of 5 is high risk, score of -5 is low risk. And one of the things that if you've been watching our videos on UDPIs we've been putting out for other assets, we have UDPIs for Bitcoin, for Ethereum. We're up to, I think, 14 now. We're adding more every week. You'll be pretty familiar with the kind of recurring theme where the UDPI tends to be quite good at identifying these low risk zones, these green zones in an asset's price history when it historically had been advantageous to be acquiring the asset at that point. And then also these high-risk zones, these red zones, where historically it had been advantageous to be selling the asset or getting out of the market. So I think it's quite, it instills a lot of confidence in me personally that the UDPI is so good at being able to do this for all these different assets we throw at it. Pretty much, so far every single asset that I've thrown at the UDPI, it's been able to handle. It's been able to identify the low-risk zones and the high-risk zones. But one question that you always have to ask with these types of models, and since we're data scientists here at Upside Down Data, we always are thinking along these kinds of lines, is with a model like this, is its output really something it can do in real time accurately, or is it just reflecting hindsight bias? So for example, when I created this model, I did it kind of over in this time zone over here. So I had access to all of this data when originally kind of developing the UDPI indicator for Bitcoin. And so the question then, that one of the first questions I had after I developed the indicator for Bitcoin was, okay, this looks pretty good. It looks like it seems to identify low and high risk zones pretty well, but is it only able to do so because it has full knowledge of Bitcoin's price action up to this point? And would it really be able to do this in real time? So for example, if I had created the UDPI back here in March instead of over here, would it still have been able to identify this as being a low risk zone here? And then had I just had the UDPI running all the way through this move, would it have been able to identify the spring, kind of this time when Bitcoin really kind of tapped out before the correction, would it be able to identify that accurately as this high risk zone like we see it doing right here? Or is this all just hindsight bias? So it turns out we can answer this question. This is the question we can test. And the way we can do it is basically by doing kind of a time travel exercise in a way where we basically cut off how much data we allow the model to access, let it only fit itself up to data up until, for example, March 2020, or only up until, April 2021, or only up until the summer, and then see if it's still able to give those correct predictions. See if it's able to do that in its mind real time, because it doesn't have any knowledge of what happens after, or not. So let's take a look at that. Let's see what happens. So I'm gonna use this move here as kind of our test case. So let's imagine that the UDPI was created right here in March of 2020, and it had no knowledge of what kind of came after this. So what I'm showing you here is, again, Bitcoin's price history, but what I've done is I made the model blind to data past March of 2020. So I've just basically only let it fit itself to data up until this point. It has no knowledge of what comes after this. I've cut it off from that knowledge. So as far as the model knows, it is currently March of 2020. And what you can see is that it gets it right. It identifies March of 2020 as being a low risk time to be acquiring Bitcoin, and we all know, since here we are sitting in November 2021, we all know that's the correct answer. It called it right. But as far as it knows, it has no idea what's going on after this. It doesn't have that knowledge of the future, but it's still getting it right. So that's good. That's what we want to see. So now, how does it handle a high risk situation? So it calls this a low point pretty well. How does it handle that move into the spring that we know was getting quite high risk before that big correction? Well, again, it gets it quite right. So here I'm now letting the model see data up until the local top in April of 2021 and nothing after that. So it has no idea about the correction that's coming in a couple months. But it gets it right. See, we came off of March 2020, and here we are up in this high zone. It has no idea what's coming after this, and it's still identifying it as a high risk zone, a point at which you'd want to be careful, maybe exiting the Bitcoin market. And then, of course, we know that this was the correct call because we know what happened after this. But importantly, the model doesn't know that. So I only let the model for this graph, I only let it fit itself up until April of 2021. It has no knowledge of what comes after. It only has knowledge up to that local top, the high that I put in for that part of the market cycle. Okay, so that's good. So now we know I called this really low point, called this really high point. Let's also just see what it would think about the summer, right? So if it was being created in real time right there, would it identify the summer as being this great time to buy, which we know now in hindsight it was. It was this great kind of buy the dip type of opportunity. Would the model see it the same way? And yes, so here what I'm doing is I'm only letting it see data up until that local bottom that we saw in July of 2021. And again, it identifies the summer as being a low risk time for Bitcoin. It's calling that right. It's getting that prediction right. And then sure enough, now we know that, it's off to the races. So here I am showing you the risk indicator for it fitting across all the data now again. And so it's currently sitting at a level of around 1, a little over 1 currently. But what I think is useful about this kind of exercise is it helps us rule out that possibility of this just being hindsight bias, right? Because if it was merely hindsight bias, if hindsight bias was the only reason it was able to identify these points, it would not have been able to do what we just saw it do. It would not have been able to, in real time, call this as a low risk zone and this as a high risk zone if it was all just hindsight. And so this suggests that if the UDPI had been calling this whole move in real time, it would have been giving you the same kind of output. It would have said low risk here, would have said high risk here, maybe time to be exiting, and then it would have been actually useful in real time. So this is not just a historical exercise. We're not just identifying historical moves as being high or low risk. It's actually able to do this in real time, which is really useful. And frankly, what we want. There's no use to having a model that's only able to look backwards and identify high and low risk. We want something that's going to be able to call it as it sees it right now, as how high or low risk is the asset in this current moment as we go forward. So we'll have to, we have the UDPI running now, so we'll be able to watch what it does in real time. But because it was able to accurately call this move here, that gives me a lot more confidence, a good amount of confidence with this indicator that it will be able to give good readings into the future, that we can kind of give some confidence to the output it's saying, and that we're not having to worry so much about that hindsight issue there. And so that's just something I think is useful about the UDPI approach. And so moving forward, we're going to keep an eye on the Bitcoin UDPI, kind of seeing when Bitcoin might be heating up. And we also have all those UDPIs running for other assets, and we'll keep an eye on them, see how those perform in real time and what they're suggesting about those different assets. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and give us a follow us on Twitter. And remember, with UDPI, we're all going to make it.